everyone, welcome back to my channel if you've been here before, but welcome if you're new. This video, I assume, is the kind of video that may end up being watched in the future by those of you who have never come across my channel before. So, as you can tell from the title, I am here to share my top 10 freelancer tips. And if you don't know much about me, then you might not know that my primary source of income has been as a freelancer for the past 4 years or so. I've been freelance longer than 4 years. I've been registered as self-employed for longer than 4 years, but it wasn't always my primary source of income because I have been working, doing self-employed work alongside work for companies. Back in the day, I used to work in a publishing house 4 days a week. So there's my sort of background and length of time as a freelancer. And for those of you that don't know what I do a few different things. I am an author. I write books for children like this one, Greek Myths, as well as Egyptian Myths, which is out later this year in August, as well as fantasy novels. I am a traditionally published children's author for the time being and a self-published fantasy author for the time being. That is where I'm at, and this is Flames of Albion, which, like I mentioned, is a fantasy novel. So those are my current published works. I also have a few books which are scheduled to come out in 2022 and 2023 that I'm already contracted for or have written and have agreed upon publishing dates. So that's my career as an author. I am also a content creator. Obviously, I'm sitting here right now talking to you on YouTube, so you know that I make YouTube videos. I also run a podcast and create content on a variety of different platforms, but my other primary source of income is as a social media consultant slash manager. So I have worked both for individuals, for example, authors, or for companies like PR agencies and publishing houses and other similar organisations to both create content for them as well as run their social media platforms and give them advice on growing their social media platforms and creating content for a variety of different people. So for those of you who are interested, in the past I've done things like edit videos and create Instagram content for authors like Charles Spencer, who is a non-fiction history writer. I've been employed as a social media assistant by online magazines like The Pool, which doesn't actually exist anymore, but it used to, and I worked for them for a while. I have ran social media campaigns, I have assisted on social media campaigns, and like I said, I've worked for a variety of organisations. So that's the field I work in, and I feel like that's important to iterate at the beginning of this video for those that don't already know, because there are a vast array of self-employed fields. For almost every employment field that exists, there's a self-employed equivalent. Not every single one. I haven't heard of any self-employed firefighters at this point in time, but you know what I mean. It's a very different and diverse world, and being a freelancer or being self-employed does not mean the same thing for everybody. So of course these tips are coming from my position in my field and what I do as a self-employed author and social media consultant and content creator, but I'm sure many of them will be useful generally to no matter what field you're in, and for those who are interested in the fields that I work in, they will probably be even more useful. But I do think that these are more general pieces of advice. There are also tips that I've picked up over the years from friends or from own experiences that I think are particularly good to know in your early years as a self-employed person and before going into being a self-employed person. So without further ado, this intro's been long enough, let's talk about my top 10 tips for being self-employed. So these are in no particular order, but tip number 1 is to never assume you have work until you have signed a contract. And now there may be instances in which a contract is not signed because sometimes an email agreement is made and that's enough, but I have had plenty of experiences where I have started to think I can count on a piece of work that in a few months I'm going to have this piece of work because I've had a long conversation back and forth with an organisation, and then it's just not happened. And I was actually raised by a freelancer. My mum has been a freelance graphic designer for decades, and that's something I've seen happen to her as well as my friends who are freelancers, who are authors, who get proposed work, who get very excited about work, and then it just doesn't happen. Sometimes it falls through for a reason, sometimes you just don't hear back and it's like a company's moved on or they were never that serious about it in the first place. So for all the time that you might spend emailing back and forth, you might be up to the point where you're discussing rates and timelines, it's something that, although hopefully will go forward, might not. So it's just to get into your head that you shouldn't assume you have a piece of work until you're very much at that cemented point in the conversation, because otherwise then you can rely on it. You might start to schedule other things around it. You might cancel things. You might not take on another piece of work because you think you're going to be doing this piece of work. You might think you're going to have a certain amount of money that you then end up don't having because you don't have that piece of work to pay you. So it's really just worth bearing in mind that you shouldn't assume you have the piece of work until it is very much formalised, particularly in the form of a contract. Following on from that, my second piece of advice is to never assume your invoices will be paid on time. I hate to say this, and this is one of the worst parts about being a freelancer, and it's something that freelancers are constantly campaigning for, that they're striving for, we're having conversations about, and we're demanding is on-time payment. But that does not necessarily mean in a practical sense that it always happens. So as somebody who is presumably invoicing for your payment, often during or post the piece of work that you have completed, remember that there is a chance it will not get paid on time. So where possible, be prepared financially for that. I have had invoices be paid super early. I've had invoices that have been paid a few days late, a few weeks late. I've had invoices that I have had to chase up for months before I've ever been paid for them. So I've had to sort of readjust my financial situation, consider what money I actually have, and just because I've done the piece of work doesn't mean I have the money, and I don't have the money yet. Yes, you should get the money, but you might not get it when you want the money, and given that you are relying on your own payment from companies, that you don't have a contract with an employer who pays you regularly every month, you need to be prepared for these things. And in the most extreme version of this, I have had experiences where I've never gotten paid. I mentioned earlier in this video that I worked for a little while for The Pool, which was an online magazine. Well, when I worked for The Pool, they went into administration and basically the whole company went bust, and all of their employees were left without money. Their, contracted employees who worked for them for years didn't get paid for the most recent months, and their freelancers didn't get paid. Their invoices were not paid, and I lost over £1,000 of work that I had completed, time I had spent working for this organisation that I never got reimbursed for. And that is an extreme scenario, and that's the only time that's happened to me. And I know lots of people that hasn't happened to, but obviously I also know people that that has happened to. And I don't want to scare people off being freelance, but I do want you to be prepared for advanced financial planning as opposed to relying on paychecks week to week. Which brings me on to tip number 3, and that is to work in advance. So when I first became a self-employed person or a freelancer, I had saved a little bit of money. So I didn't jump in to being a freelancer with £0 in my bank account. Now that's not going to be everybody's situation, and you might have recently lost your job and this is quite a new scenario for you, and it's always very easy to say, have savings, but I in my own life have had periods where I've not been able to save. But I went into the position with a little bit of money in my bank account because I didn't want to just quit my job and then have nothing sitting there to pay rent with, and I was paying rent at the time, so obviously I needed to make sure I was going to be able to pay it the following month even if I didn't get any work, or if I didn't get paid by that work on time. So when I first became freelance, I tried to work a minimum 3 months ahead. So any money that I was earning, say in January, I wasn't preparing myself to use in January. My work in January was to pay for, April, May. That's how I was thinking about it, and in January I would have hopefully had money from work I'd done 3 or 4 months before that to pay for the things I needed in January, if that makes sense, because you don't know what's going to happen month to month. I've had months where I have been absolutely slammed against the wall with work, where I've been working over weekends to get everything done, and I have earned more than I have done in 3 months combined. And I've also had months where I have effectively earned close to nothing, because that is the nature of certain freelance industries. And that was my initial plan, was to always be 3 months in advance. It's been quite a few years now, so I am a little bit more in advanced than that now, but I think it's just really important to think about the money you're earning as being money that you're earning for 3 to 4 months down the line at a minimum, rather than thinking of it as money you're going to need the next month. Like I said, that's an ideal scenario. I'm not saying this always happens. Things get really messy and we don't live in a perfect world, but these are just, you know, my like ideal scenario tips if you can manage them. Moving away from depressing discussions of late invoice payments though, my fourth tip is actually to make some freelancer pals, to make some friends who also have freelance jobs, who are also self-employed. And I think this is true of a lot of situations. I've been also conducting a part-time PhD for the past few years, and knowing other people that are doing a PhD has been really important for me. It's been really supportive, knowing people that are going through the same thing as you. And I think that applies to freelance life, because as a freelancer, a lot of people work by themselves, not everybody. You might sometimes work with other people. Like I said, I've worked in businesses, I've worked as part of teams as a freelancer, but I've also had jobs that have just been me at my computer by myself for months on time, particularly when it comes to the writing portion of a book before the editorial process. I don't have a ton of interaction with somebody. And it can be quite lonely. It can be both quite lonely to be doing all of your work by yourself at home alone, but it can also be lonely to not have people to talk to about your work. And I have quite a few friends I've made over the years who are also authors, or who are content creators, or who work freelance in social media or in other parts of the media. And we get to talk about our work, and we can complain about our work, and we can share our excitement when we get exciting work projects. We can also consult when we're working with the same company, and the same goes for fees and what you're charging, and being able to discuss with friends and other people in your field what they're charging and how much work they're being expected to do within certain timeframes, because I am very much an advocate of openness when it comes to these kind of topics, because it makes it a lot harder for people to take advantage of you or to pit you against one another in those scenarios. So I just find it very, very useful and comforting to have friends in a similar position to me, and we don't all do the same things. I have freelance friends who run Etsy stores and are creatives that make, you know, physical things, and they're artists, and that's not what I do. But we're still allowed to share our experiences and chat with one another, and it also means sometimes we can work together. I sometimes work over Zoom with friends, and we just keep each other company while we're sitting at our computers or our desks, and I love it. It's really, really nice, and there are lots of spaces in which you can do this. You can make freelance friends on pretty much any social media platform, from Instagram to TikTok to YouTube to Twitter to Reddit, what have you. It's just about, you know, sort of like putting yourself out there, or when you meet people when you're working with certain companies and organisations, there's no reason you can't stay in touch with them. So I think sort of having one or two people that are in a similar position to you is really, really, really helpful and supportive. Apologies if the sun was glaring in your eyes before. I've done a little bit of a lighting adjustment. But my next tip, tip number 5, is to try and get some traditional experience in your field. Now this one, again, very much goes for those of you who haven't become freelance yet, or are doing small amounts of freelance work on the side. So like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I didn't just jump headfirst into being freelance. I didn't graduate uni and then suddenly have a self-employed business. Some people do, and that's great. But for a lot of people, it's a matter of slowly getting there. And I know a lot of people that have been in that position. They have, for example, worked for, you know, 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, 10 years in an industry, and then taking the skills they've learned in this industry, sometimes taking the contacts they've made in this industry and transferring them to the self-employed sort of field and world. So for myself, I worked in-house in a publishing house. That for me was very, very helpful. I don't think I could have done some of the things I'm doing now if it hadn't been for the people I'd met in that situation, and also for the skills I'd garnered, and just from the life experience I'd garnered from that. It also is a somewhat more stable, you know, employment form. Not always, but sometimes. So it gave me that little bit of security that, like I mentioned, I was able to go into freelance with a few months worth of rent saved up already. So again, you may already be freelance and this is a useless piece of advice, but I don't think there's anything wrong with sort of trialing working in a traditional industry you're interested in before jumping into freelance work. It's also something that you can add to your CV when you're looking for freelance work that, you know, shows your skills, your abilities and your commitment. And you still need that when you're looking for freelance employers. You still need to have some sort of CV and experiences. Well, I suppose not in every situation, but like in my situation, if I'm asking for a company or an individual to employ me as a social media consultant, they need to be able to see that I have experience and can do that, which again sort of leads me into my next point, and that is to have a website and to have some sort of social media presence. And that doesn't mean, you know, you have to film YouTube videos, it doesn't mean you have to post pictures of your face on Instagram, but there's a lot of reasons to have things like a website and to have a Twitter account and to have an Instagram, and it's not all about, you know, like posting cute pictures, which is fun, but in terms of practicalities of getting freelance work, it is very, very useful to be discoverable. If somebody is literally just Googling to find somebody in your field to hire, then this is an excellent way to be found, to be on social media. It makes it easier for people to tag you in things, to share your work, which can promote you in another sense. If you are an author, it's really great for marketing your work, for sharing your work, for engaging in communities and meeting people in your field. It has so many benefits. But then also in terms of something like a website, it creates a landing page that you can send people to with a portfolio or a CV. So I, for example, have on my website some of the services that I offer. My website has a bunch of different stuff on it for all of the different things that I do in my life, but one of those is a freelance section where it talks about the services you can employ me for in order for people to get an idea of who I am and what they might be able to use me for in their business before they email me. And I think having a website or some sort of social media presence is really, really beneficial in that sense. So yeah, I would really highly recommend that one. But don't get me wrong, it doesn't need to be anything fancy, particularly at the beginning. You don't need to spend lots of money. You can get like a free website, you know, that has WordPress in the title. That's absolutely fine. For tip number 7 though, it's not all about discoverability, it's also about being able to put yourself out there. So tip number 7 is don't be afraid to seek out work. It can be very easy to feel as a freelancer that you just need to sit by your email inbox and wait for people to contact you. Wait for people to find you online, wait for past clients to recommend you to new clients and to receive those emails looking to employ you. But sometimes there are opportunities for you to put yourself out there, for you to contact employers, for you to offer your services. Now this might be through a job listing, so sometimes companies will advertise for freelancers. Some companies will want to employ somebody short-term, part-time on a freelance basis rather than as a contracted employee, and you can actually apply for that in the same way you would a traditional job. But in other instances, you may just want to put yourself forward for something that isn't even being advertised. Put yourself forward to a company and offer your services, whatever they are. So if you're an illustrator, you might want to, you know, drop an author an email and offer to do some work with them. I'm not suggesting that you start emailing people and offering them all your services for free. I don't think you should underestimate yourself or undervalue yourself. There's absolutely nothing wrong for just making someone aware of your presence. You may never hear back from them, and that's completely okay. Nobody owes you a response. But yeah, I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with putting yourself out there in a polite, friendly way without too many expectations, but without undervaluing yourself as well. So yeah, you know, there's nothing wrong with seeking out work. You don't have to just wait for work to come to you. Number 8's another boring one, which is keep good records. This is specifically for the purposes of taxes. So taxes work differently depending on what country you live in. In the UK, if you live in the UK, I'm sure you're aware tax is something that's automatically done through your employer unless you're freelance. If you're self-employed, you have to manage your own taxes. You have to submit your tax returns every year and pay your taxes. So there's a bunch of different things you need to remember in terms of being self-employed in the UK. Firstly, you need to register as self-employed. Secondly, you want to keep a record of both your income and your expenses. So anything you buy for your business, keep a record of it. And then when it comes time to complete your tax return every year, you should have some nice records that you can, you know, automatically look to, check how much income you have, submit it to HMRC, and they'll tell you how much tax you owe. And you will also throughout the year want to remind yourself continuously that you will have to pay tax unless you're earning underneath the first tax bracket. I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's something around 11 or 12,000 pound. Your earnings beneath that amount aren't taxed, but anything above that will be taxed. You can obviously check online at HMRC. So anything you're earning above that will be taxed, and you don't want to come to the end of the year and have £0 free in your bank account and be told that you owe £1,000, £5,000 to HMRC, whatever it is. You want to have a little bit of money ready and prepared to pay those taxes. But that's obviously like its whole own topic that like probably deserves its whole own video, and you can find tons of resources for submitting your taxes online. But one thing I just think is really important is keeping good records, and that means you will be less stressed when it comes time to do your taxes, and you will also have a much like clearer, broader idea of how your business is doing. More fun perhaps is tip number 9, however, which is to, you know, keep good working hours and allow yourself rest. It is very, very easy if you are self-employed, but also I think just generally if you work at home, as many of us do now, to let work bleed into your resting hours, to bleed into your dinner time, to bleed into your, you know, casually watching Netflix time, to bleed into your weekends. And I, you know, I'm the first to admit, I've spent weekends working, I've spent evenings working, and there's nothing wrong with doing that occasionally, you know, it's good to be flexible. But you should also allow yourself rest. You shouldn't be working 24/7 every single day of the week, every single day of the month. You deserve a holiday. Everybody does. It's a human right to have rest. And you're also going to do better work at the end of the day if you have rest time. So I think, you know, as much as possible, where possible, creating some sort of routine. If that means working Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, fine. It doesn't have to be that. I have friends who work Sundays to Thursdays for whatever reason, or work 10 a.m. to 6 p.m, or work 8 a.m. to 4 p.m, whatever works for you, but having some sort of schedule, allowing yourself to clock out, even if it's literally just moving from your desk to your sofa. Do that. Take care of yourself. Then lastly, tip number 10 is to know your worth. So this is another one where like I could spend a whole, you know, hour seminar talking about this, if not more, and I think it's also a really good reason to have freelancer friends, because as a self-employed person, sometimes it can get a little bit difficult to, you know, gauge what you should be charging. So do research. There are plenty of resources for researching rates on different things. There are unions like the NUJ, which do have a freelancer branch in the UK that offer advice on rates. There's the Society of Authors. There's also just looking at other people's websites and what they charge, and that's not so you can undercut them, because that's a scummy thing to do. It's so that you can get an idea of what is fair and also what you're worth, because we all deserve to pay our electricity and our rent and to eat food and to survive. And if somebody wants your services, then they need to be willing to pay for them. Now that might vary. I have charged less when I've worked with a charity than I necessarily have with a bigger business. Same for smaller employers who have a smaller budget. It's okay to be flexible, but it's also good to have your minimums and your maximums and have an idea of what seems fair and what, you know, is valid for your time, to have an hourly rate, to have a day rate, to have a rate per type of work, and to have that all set up. Know your worth, know your value, be fair and reasonable, and, you know, have fun working. I hope you have enjoyed this video. I hope it's been useful if you are freelance or considering going freelance. I'm happy to answer any more detailed questions in the comments down below. Might not be able to answer them because all of our freelance journeys are different, but if you'd like to ask, then please do. And I'd also love to hear any of your tips, because I don't think I've got everything perfected or sorted out at this point, and I'm sure there's plenty more I could learn. So yeah, let me know. I'll also obviously have all of my resources, like my website if you want to have a look at it, linked down below, my books if you're interested in reading any of them, as well as my Patreon if you would like to support the content I create online, like my podcast and my channel. But yeah, until next time, you know, happy working, happy relaxing, take care of yourself, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye everyone.